Hello there. Tonight, we gently open the historical archives, not with a flourish, but with a quiet, almost imperceptible turn of the page. We will not rush, nor will we seek dramatic revelations, but instead, we will simply allow our minds to drift. Our destination is a quiet corner of Victorian London, a city of grand avenues and shadowed alleyways, now softened by the passage of time and the gentle hum of memory. Picture, if you will, the slow descent of evening, as the gas lamps along the cobblestone streets flicker into life, casting long, dancing shadows. The insistent clamor of the day begins to wane, the distant rumble of carriages growing softer, and the great metropolis itself seems to sigh, slowly settling into its slumber. It is in this twilight hush, this peaceful interlude, that we embark upon our quiet exploration, seeking not the roar of history, but its whispers. In the true spirit of Unwind University, our journey is not about memorizing dates or dissecting grand narratives. Rather, it is an invitation to simply be present, to absorb a forgotten echo from the past, allowing it to resonate softly within your resting mind. Tonight, our particular focus rests upon a small, an almost forgotten aspect of that bustling Victorian past. It is not a tale of monarchs or momentous battles, nor of groundbreaking inventions that reshaped the world. Instead, we seek something far more modest, something that once formed a quiet, unassuming thread in the fabric of everyday life, often overlooked, yet undeniably present in the daily rhythm of millions. We will explore tiny, intricate details that, collectively, paint a much richer and often more comforting picture of a bygone era. This gentle inquiry is designed to be a soothing balm for the overstimulated mind, a soft current to carry you towards peaceful rest. We are not here to solve mysteries or to uncover hidden secrets, but merely to observe, to understand, and to allow a gentle sense of connection to a time long past. The subject we will muse upon is one that, while perhaps seeming insignificant at first glance, offers a surprising window into the practicalities and even the social nuances of Victorian life. It was an aspect of existence so utterly commonplace, so universally understood by the people of that age, that it rarely warranted a second thought. Yet its very commonality makes it a grounding point for our tranquil evening, inviting a quiet understanding as the night deepens around us. Just a simple, slow unfolding of a small corner of history, illuminated not with a harsh spotlight, but with the soft, steady glow of a single gas lamp. The quiet understanding of that gas lamp's glow now extends beyond the window pane, gently spilling onto the very fabric of London's night. Imagine for a moment stepping out onto the cobblestone streets themselves, not with hurried purpose, but with a slow, contemplative gaze. The air here holds a soft, pervasive mist, not quite rain, but enough to dampen the ancient stones, making them gleam faintly under what few distant lights might still pierce the gloom. This fine veil of moisture mutes the world, softening edges and muffling sounds, drawing a quiet blanket over the bustling city that hours ago thrummed with life. The insistent clatter and rumble of carriages which defined the daytime rhythm has now dwindled to little more than a memory, a faint echo that drifts from the furthest, most persistent thoroughfares before dissolving entirely into the still air. Here, in the heart of many a respectable neighborhood, the grand houses of the wealthy stand silent, their many windows dark, like watchful, unblinking eyes closed in slumber. Their imposing facades, usually vibrant with activity, now simply absorb the deepening night, each brick and pane of glass reflecting nothing but the profound quiet that has settled upon them. There is no urgency in their stillness, only a stately repose. Moving away from these more open, monumental structures, the narrow alleys that crisscross the city present a different aspect of this nocturnal calm. Here, the deepening shadows claim the space with a more complete authority, becoming almost tangible. They pool in corners, stretch along worn brick walls, and cling to the underside of protruding eaves, creating a layered darkness that feels both ancient and entirely natural. These are the forgotten arteries of the city, now surrendered to an undisturbed quiet, where the hurried human footprint is less evident, and the raw presence of the city itself feels more palpable, a simple, enduring presence. Beneath the hushed surface of these streets, and within the quietude of these shadowed spaces, life continues, albeit in a different, more subdued register. The night, after all, is not truly empty. It merely rearranges its inhabitants. While the human world sleeps, other subtle energies persist, an unseen network of tiny movements and quiet presences that navigate the dark without notice. They are the small, often unnoticed elements of the natural world that share our urban environment, making their patient way through the forgotten crevices and the hidden depths of the city. A gentle, almost imperceptible stirring just below the threshold of our everyday perception. A soft presence that moves unseen in the quiet dark. And so, as the city breathes its deep, even slumber, we turn our quiet attention from those unseen natural stirrings to another gentle presence that also moves through the deep of night, often unnoticed, almost a part of the shadows themselves. Tonight, we will observe those known as crawlers, not scurrying insects, but people who navigate the quiet hours with a slow, deliberate pace. Their movement is not one of haste or purpose in the way the day understands it, but rather a soft, almost imperceptible drift through the cool, silent streets. They seek a brief respite from the biting chill, a momentary pause in the endless confrontation with the cold air that permeates everything. Each step is measured, each turn of the head a slow survey of the darkened storefronts and sleeping buildings. There is no urgency in their stride, only a patient endurance, a quiet unfolding of their journey under the distant glow of streetlights. They hug themselves a little tighter, their breath a faint mist in the air, their eyes perhaps fixed on some inner landscape, or simply observing the peaceful, empty spaces around them. Unnoticed by the hurried world, they become part of the night's own slow pulse, blending into the quiet rhythm that only those who dwell within its embrace truly know. Their soft presence is a whisper against the backdrop of the city's vast, sleeping silence, a subtle energy that persists even when all seems still. They move from one fleeting shelter to another, a brief overhang here, a recessed doorway there, each location offering a momentary, slight reduction of the pervasive cold. It is a slow ballet of survival, performed with quiet dignity in the deserted theater of the urban night. Their path is not always straight, nor is it often quick. It is a winding journey guided by the simple, profound need to avoid the harshest edge of the night's embrace. This slow, persistent movement, this quiet navigation through the cold, holds within it a fundamental human longing. It is a subtle but constant quest, a quiet search for something more comforting than the open night, a soft, almost hopeful yearning for any small corner where a gentler atmosphere might reside. This slow, persistent movement, this quiet navigation through the cold, holds within it a fundamental human longing. It is a subtle but constant quest, a quiet search for something more comforting than the open night, a soft, almost hopeful yearning for any small corner where a gentler atmosphere might reside. Their slow movements weren't by choice, but a quiet necessity born of weary bones and an aching need for warmth. Each step was a silent plea against the harsh embrace of the Victorian night. The chill seemed to seep into the very marrow, a constant, low thrumming of discomfort that urged a perpetual, gentle locomotion. This was not a hurried dash, but a measured shuffle, conserving what little energy remained. Each breath a small cloud in the dim street lamp glow. The air itself held a damp weight, promising no easy respite, only the enduring presence of the cold. Their search for warmth was not a dramatic expedition across vast landscapes, but rather a series of humble investigations into the city's minor nooks and crannies. A recessed doorway, perhaps, might offer a momentary shield from the biting wind. The space beneath a low-slung archway could provide a measure of overhead cover from a fine, drizzling rain. Even pressing against the rough brick of a building, hoping to absorb some residual warmth from the day's sun, was a common, quiet ritual. These were not places of comfort, but points of momentary, slight reduction in discomfort. Small victories against the pervasive chill, offering just enough illusion of shelter to briefly lift the spirits. Yet, even these small alcoves and slight indentations offered little true warmth, serving more as psychological anchors in a sea of cold. The dampness still permeated, the stone or brick still radiated its own chill, and the wind, though softened, found its way around corners. They were not homes, nor even proper shelters, but merely less exposed points along an otherwise open and unforgiving path. The expectation was never a roaring fire or a soft bed, but simply a temporary lessening of the raw exposure, a brief pause in the relentless confrontation with the elements, a chance to, perhaps just, sit for a little while. The search, therefore, became an ongoing process, a continuous, quiet negotiation with the sprawling, indifferent city. Each night presented its own unique configuration of cold and shadow, of dampness and wind, requiring a renewed effort to locate some fleeting solace. Despite their best, most persistent efforts to find even the slightest haven, the stark reality often remained. Their wanderings, their hopeful glances into dark corners, their quiet huddling against cold stone, ultimately led back to the fundamental truth of their existence. Many, many nights were simply spent outdoors. This enduring reality, the constant confrontation with the elements, marked a profound and lasting condition. For many, the idea of a soft bed or the comforting solidity of a roof overhead remained a distant, unattainable vision. Such comfort was often beyond their daily thoughts, reserved for others, for a different world. They were left instead to the vast, cold embrace of the city's open spaces, the sky above them their only ceiling. The cobbled streets, shadows beneath monuments, the edges of public squares, these became their reluctant resting places. Each night brought a renewed struggle against the chill that seeped into bones, against the dampness clinging to threadbare clothing, and against omnipresent vulnerability. The ground, often uneven and unyielding, offered little comfort, pressing into tired limbs with a persistent reminder of their circumstances. The wind, when it stirred, could cut through the thinnest layers, making any attempt at warmth a momentary and often futile effort. The sounds of the city, a constant backdrop, became amplified in the quiet hours, a stark awareness of life continuing elsewhere. Sleep, when it came, was rarely deep or truly restorative. It was a fleeting companion, arriving in brief, shallow snatches, easily broken by the distant clang of a bell, the rumble of a cart, or simply the persistent discomfort of cold, hard surroundings. Consciousness often hovered, a thin veil between wakefulness and a fragile doze, never quite allowing for true surrender to slumber. Each passing moment of quiet rest was a tentative loan from the night, easily recalled by the harsh realities of their unprotected state. This interrupted, broken pattern of rest meant that true recuperation was seldom achieved. Weariness accumulated, a heavy cloak settling over both body and mind. The longing for genuine warmth, for the safety of an enclosed space, for the simple quiet a roof could provide, became a constant, unspoken undercurrent to their existence. It was a silent wish carried through the long, endless nights, a deep desire for a reprieve that rarely, if ever, arrived. And so, these individuals learned to read the city's built environment for even the slightest comfort or protection. They sought out the smallest imperfections, the accidental shelters, the modest architectural features that offered a brief shield from the elements. A recessed doorway, the shallow overhang of a cornice, the protective curve of an archway. These were not homes, but momentary havens. They offered perhaps a few degrees of warmth, a patch of dryness, or a momentary illusion of safety. It was in these slight indentations, these subtle projections of the urban landscape, that they often found a fleeting and temporary refuge from the vast openness. The search for such modest architectural features was an almost instinctive pursuit. Weary from constant exposure to the city's indifferent expanse, individuals would direct their steps towards small alcoves, the shelter of a recessed doorway, or the curving arch of a bridge. Each offered a distinct, transient opportunity for a moment's reprieve. It was a humble seeking of a brief pause, a temporary shield from prevailing conditions, assessed with slow deliberation. These chosen spots, found with quiet hope, were by no means luxurious. The surfaces were invariably hard, cold stone, rough brick, or unyielding concrete. Such materials offered little comfort to a tired body, no softness for a weary head. Yet their very solidity provided a tangible barrier. They could block the direct force of a biting wind, deflect a sudden gust of rain, or reduce a sharp glare. It was a trade-off, a lack of ease for a small measure of protection. Within these confined spaces, a fleeting sense of semi-seclusion could sometimes be found. Tucked into the recess of a doorway or beneath the curve of an arch, one felt momentarily less exposed to the vastness of the city and its unpredictable temperament. Here, one could huddle, perhaps pulling a thin garment tighter, or simply close one's eyes for a few quiet moments. The street sounds might be slightly muted, the immediate sensory assault of the open air lessened, allowing for a fleeting breath of calm. But the protection offered by these simple structures was always limited, a fragile boundary against persistent forces. The hard surfaces, while shielding, absorbed and radiated the cold. The wind, though broken, often swirled around the edges, finding new angles to penetrate. Dampness, even when not directly falling, often permeated the air of these sheltered spots, a constant reminder of the world outside. These were not places of true warmth, but merely where the immediate onslaught of the elements was slightly, marginally reduced. And so, even within the temporary sanctuary of an alcove, or beneath the solid curve of a bridge arch, the sensation remained. The chill was a constant companion, a deep-seated presence the stone walls could not fully dispel. It was a cold that seeped into bones, a pervasive coolness that lingered in the air, a silent testament to the enduring presence of the elements. Even in these small, momentarily protected spaces, the chill was never truly banished. It simply waited, patient and persistent, for the next moment of exposure. The chill, as it lingered, was not merely a temporary discomfort that came and went. It was a more enduring presence, a fundamental aspect of the very air that settled over the city, especially during the longer, darker months. This was the Victorian winter air, often unforgiving, actively seeking to penetrate every barrier. It seeped into thin clothing, finding its way through woven wool and cotton, past meager layers. This deep penetration meant the cold often settled within the body, chilling to the very bone. It became an internal tremor, a profound coolness in the joints and marrow, a constant, low-level thrum of discomfort. For many, this persistent chill was more than an inconvenience. It served as an unspoken, daily reminder of their precarious existence. The warmth of a well-stoked fire, sufficient layers, or a stout roof were luxuries not universally shared, making the cold a quiet, relentless pressure, affirming harsh realities for those with limited means. Yet, this persistent coolness was not solely confined to winter's depths. Even as the calendar turned toward brighter months, and the city bathed in longer light, the air retained a certain characteristic. The nights, in particular, could bring a surprising coolness, even after a day that had felt reasonably mild. A sudden drop as the sun dipped, or a breeze from the river, could transform a pleasant evening into one where a shiver might easily run down the spine. This was not the biting cold of January, but a gentle, unmistakable coolness, reminding that lasting warmth was a fleeting visitor, never quite settled. This ongoing encounter with the air's temperament meant the search for warmth, or a respite from the chill, was an almost unconscious, constant preoccupation. It shaped the way people moved, how they wrapped their children, how a hot cup of tea felt cherished. Even in quiet moments, as the body sought to conserve heat, a subtle awareness of the world outside remained. One might pull a worn shawl tighter or shift closer to a flickering lamp, and in that inward drawing, the broader world beyond the immediate cold continued its slow, almost imperceptible hum. The everyday rhythm of the city, with its distant echoes and soft, diffused sounds, often faded into the background, becoming a gentle, muffled presence, just beyond the immediate sensation of the persistent chill. As the late hours progressed, the city's roar softened, and the persistent chill often deepened. The vibrant, bustling symphony of day, with its carts, voices, and commerce, gradually receded. It did not vanish entirely, but transformed, its sharp edges dissolving into something smoother, more diffused, much like a landscape viewed through a gathering mist. The insistent clamor now gave way to a profound quietude. This transition was not abrupt, but a slow, almost imperceptible dimming, like the last glow of embers fading into the pervasive stillness that gently claimed the urban landscape. In this hushed environment, certain sounds, utterly lost amidst the daytime din, now found a subtle clarity, a gentle resonance. One might discern the distant, solemn toll of a church bell, marking the passage of an hour in the deep quietude. It was not a startling clang, but a measured, tender vibration, carrying through the cool night air, a soft reminder of time's steady, unyielding march. Or perhaps, from a far-off street, the lonely, rhythmic cry of a night watchman would drift on the faint breeze. A simple announcement of "all's well," often elongated by the quiet, creating a sense of solitary vigil. These gentle echoes, these softened notes from the slumbering city, formed a natural soundtrack to the quiet vigils kept by those who, for whatever reason, found themselves awake. For those nestled in their beds, perhaps drifting in and out of sleep, these sounds wove themselves into the fabric of their rest, a quiet assurance that the world, though hushed, still gently breathed. For those who remained fully awake, perhaps a scholar poring over a manuscript, or a sentinel standing guard, these sounds offered a subtle companionship. They were not intrusive, but rather a comforting presence, a shared experience with the broader, unseen city. As the night deepened further, these muffled city sounds, the faint clatter, the distant call, the almost inaudible rustle of the wind, became a shared, unspoken experience among all who navigated these quiet hours. Whether one was safely behind solid walls or moving slowly through the shadowy thoroughfares, the very air seemed to carry these soft sonic textures. It was a time when the individual human presence felt both isolated and yet subtly connected, aware of the vastness of the sleeping city, but also knowing that somewhere others were also awake. These subtle soundscapes were for all who, by circumstance or choice, were out and about, traversing the silent, watchful expanse of the late-night hours. For indeed, even as most slept, there were always others, moving quietly through this very same muted world. The quiet fabric of the late-night city, then, was not woven solely by those we might consider its focused crawlers, moving with a distinct, often laborious purpose. No, the expanse of the dark hours held a broader collection of presences, a scattering of other weary souls. These were individuals who, for their own distinct reasons, also navigated the hushed avenues and lanes. They moved through the same ambient quiet, under the same distant stars, sharing the city's profound slumber, without necessarily sharing a common destination or a singular aim. Each was a fellow night wanderer, tracing their own path across the expansive canvas of the sleeping metropolis. Perhaps it was the baker beginning their early shift, the last tram conductor heading home, or a nurse concluding a long night at the hospital. It could have been someone simply unable to sleep, finding a quiet comfort in the cool, empty streets, or a scholar returning late from a research library. These individuals, often unnoticed by the city's waking bustle, carried their own silent stories. Their footsteps, soft on the pavement, were whispers of routines and responsibilities, of personal thoughts unfolding in the solitude, or of simple, quiet journeys from one point to another. Each journey was a small, contained narrative, playing out under the muted glow of the gas lamps or the faint electric streetlights. They were not necessarily looking for companionship, nor were they actively seeking out other nocturnal figures. Yet an unspoken understanding often existed among them. A nod, a glance, a shared recognition of the unique quietude that bound them together, however briefly, in the vastness of the dark. The chill in the air, the scent of damp stone, the distant hoot of an owl, or the gentle rumble of a faraway train, these were the subtle, shared details of their world. They were all inhabitants of this temporary, transient realm, a quiet interlude between the day's end and the dawn's reawakening, each moving at their own measured pace. And sometimes, even these gentle wanderings might naturally lead to a pause. A moment where the journey itself might briefly cease, where a person might find themselves standing still, perhaps at a quiet street corner, or looking out over a darkened canal. It is in such pauses, when the soft sound of one's own breath might become the most prominent sound, that the true depth of the city's slumber and one's own quiet presence within it can truly settle in. This brief cessation of movement, a small island of calm, often allows for a different kind of perception to emerge. This different kind of perception, a gentle awareness, might sometimes encourage a deeper, more deliberate withdrawal. In such circumstances, when the world seemed to hold its breath, a person might seek out a small, unobtrusive sanctuary. One might, if fortune allowed, discover a small recess, perhaps an alcove beside a darkened doorway, or a sheltered spot where two ancient walls met. Tucked away from the slow tread of any distant watchman, a person might grant themselves the simple indulgence of closing their eyes. Just for a brief spell, the heavy lids might descend, shutting out the muted gray. This was not a sleep of great depth, nor was it intended to be. It was rather a conscious choice to pause, to simply rest the weary muscles of the face, to allow the thoughts that had been circling to settle, even if only for a fleeting moment. Hidden from the direct gaze of the few passers-by, their forms shrouded by deeper shadows, one could experience a small, personal detachment. The cold, hard surfaces of the surrounding stones or aged timber might still press against one's back or side, a constant reminder of the unyielding world. Yet within this chosen corner there was a brief, imperfect peace. It was a peace found not in warmth or comfort, but in the simple act of temporary disengagement. The sounds of the city, though greatly diminished, did not entirely vanish. Perhaps the distant murmur of the river, or the faint creak of a shutter in the gentle night breeze would still reach this secluded spot. But they were sounds heard through a veil, softened and made indistinct by the quietude of the mind. This brief respite, this delicate cessation of conscious effort was a small gift, a personal allowance granted in the quiet hours when the world itself seemed to slumber. One's own breathing might become the most prominent rhythm, a soft, steady testament to life continuing, even in stillness. This quiet observation of one's own breath, this resting of the eyes, carried with it an unspoken understanding. It was a moment that could not truly last, a temporary anchoring in the deep quiet before the currents of time would gently, imperceptibly begin to shift once more. The deepest point of the night, if it had not already passed, would slowly give way to the subtle lengthening of shadows, or a nearly imperceptible lightening in the furthest reaches of the sky. The stillness, though profound, was always in motion, slowly preparing the world and those within it for a soft, unhurried turning toward what came next. The awareness of this gentle, onward progression, though faint, would eventually begin to stir, prompting a quiet readiness for movement, for the gradual passage of time. The quiet readiness for movement, for the gradual passage of time, truly settled in during these late and tranquil hours. It was as if time itself had decided to ease its swift pace, stretching out the moments into long, unhurried intervals. The world, caught between the deep slumber of night and the as-yet unseen promise of morning, seemed to hold its breath in a profound and extended pause. Each minute, rather than rushing onward, seemed to linger, a gentle current flowing at an almost imperceptible rate, making the night feel vast and without end. In this hushed stillness, the concept of urgency simply faded away. The air itself felt thick with patience, holding the lingering coolness of the deep night, undisturbed by the ordinary commotions of day. Sounds, if they came at all, were soft and distant, mere whispers against the grand canvas of silence. It was a time for unhurried observation, though there was little to observe but the unchanging shadows and the profound, enveloping dark that gradually, almost imperceptibly, thinned. And yet, even within this slowness, a quiet progression was always at work. Though the minutes felt expanded, each one was, in its own way, a silent, unhurried step closer to a new beginning. Far, far away, beyond the visible horizon, the very faintest alterations began to take shape. These were not dramatic changes, but rather the most subtle suggestions of a shift, a slight lessening of the absolute dark in the furthest reaches of the sky. It was the first, barely perceptible hint that the long reign of night was, at last, patiently preparing to yield. This gentle drawing near of something new was not sudden. It was woven into the fabric of every passing moment. Each breath taken, each thought that drifted by, each small measure of time that unfolded was simply a further quiet step towards that inevitable soft illumination. The world was not awakening abruptly, but rather patiently leaning towards the light, absorbing its slow, hesitant approach. It was a time of quiet anticipation, a profound stillness pregnant with the promise of change. And so, with a quiet patience, the world waited for what would surely follow, a new and tender promise slowly beginning to form, a very subtle hint of light, quietly preparing to reveal itself upon the patient horizon. The profound darkness, so long a companion, would soon be met with an equally gentle, yet undeniably growing, presence, promising a soft and subtle unveiling. The profound darkness that had so carefully held the world in its deep embrace now began its slow, almost imperceptible withdrawal. This was not a sudden departure, but a patient, hesitant recession, a quiet surrender to an even softer presence. Along the very edge of the vast, sleeping horizon, a subtle change, barely a whisper, started to unfold, hinting at something beyond the seemingly endless night. A faint, almost unseeable gray began to softly cling to the highest points of the distant landscape and the upper reaches of the sky. The horizon, previously swallowed by night, now began to define itself with the most delicate of lines, a very soft boundary between earth and the slowly lightening heavens. With each passing, imperceptible moment, this tender promise gained a tiny measure of substance. It was a muted spectacle, far removed from any grand display, simply a soft, gray light that, by its very quiet presence, began to gently erase the lingering shadows of the darkest hours. The world was still profoundly quiet, held in its deep slumber, but within that stillness, a very tender new beginning was quietly manifesting itself, a slow and deliberate unfolding. As this soft, increasing light spread its gentle influence, the many artificial beacons that had so steadfastly illuminated the sleeping city throughout the long night would naturally begin their own gradual retreat. The streetlights, which had bravely pierced the profound darkness with their steady glow, now seemed less essential, their purposeful beams slowly diminishing in contrast to the expanding natural illumination. They did not suddenly vanish, but rather their steadfast light grew softer, becoming more a gentle echo of the night's vigil than an urgent necessity, as the world outside them began to quietly brighten. This emerging light, a very quiet dawn, brought with it the softest hint of newness, a delicate stir of hope, perhaps even the very slightest suggestion of a warmer day to come. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible invitation to a gentle renewal, a quiet moment of transition where the deep stillness of the night gracefully gave way. This emerging light, a very quiet dawn, brought with it the softest hint of newness, a delicate stir of hope, perhaps even the very slightest suggestion of a warmer day to come. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible invitation to a gentle renewal, a quiet moment of transition where the deep stillness of the night gracefully gave way. The city, for the most part, still rested, its inhabitants held securely in their deep sleep. But the soft, expanding light was a quiet herald, a very patient preparation for the time when the city itself would begin its own slow, gentle stirring, responding to the tender promise of the day. The tender promise of the day, having patiently waited, now began its slow, deliberate fulfillment. With the gradual lightening of the sky, a process so gentle it seemed to exhale light across slumbering rooftops, the city's deep indigo cloak of night softened. One by one, or in quiet sections, the gas lamps that had faithfully held back shadows began their slow retreat. Their amber glows, once essential, now flickered with quiet resignation, becoming less illumination and more a lingering memory as natural light asserted its gentle presence. This wasn't a sudden burst of activity, but an unfolding, like a flower opening to the morning sun. The deep stillness of the very early hours, almost absolute, now allowed the first faint whispers of movement. A distant clatter, perhaps a cart's inaugural journey on cobblestone, or the soft clip-clop of a solitary horse with its milk float. These sounds, not intrusive, merely added an imperceptible layer to the diminishing silence, a gentle hint of the day's rhythm, still muted and held in reserve. And with this subtle shift, the quiet figures from the night began their gentle dispersal. A watchman, rounds complete, made his slow way home, his footsteps echoing less on the brightening pavement. A solitary scavenger, having sifted through previous refuse, faded into a side street, his silhouette dissolving against brightening walls. These individuals, knowing the city in its quietest moments, now, without fanfare, blended back into the emerging world, becoming indistinguishable as the population slowly began to stir. The gentle awakening was a composite of countless tiny, individual movements. Curtains might be drawn back, revealing sleepy eyes peering at the gradually reforming street. The distant chiming of a church bell would ring with new clarity, no longer absorbed by night's heavy blanket, but carried on the circulating morning air. A baker's boy might emerge, laden with fresh loaves, their warm, yeasty scent a subtle invitation to the day's first sustenance. Each small action contributed to the gradual building of the city's daily hum, still soft, tentative, but steadily gaining quiet momentum. The world was indeed beginning its familiar daily performance, yet a trace of the profound quiet still lingered, like a faint mist at the edges of a sunlit field. The city's deep slumber, having absorbed so much, now released its inhabitants, one by one, into the gentle light. A sense of something softly passing lingered, a quiet exchange between the hush of night and the growing murmurs of morning. It was in this transitional space, between the last dream and the first conscious thought, that the subtle spirit of the previous hours could still be felt, a quiet echo in the brightening air. In that quiet echo, a deeper awareness can sometimes unfold. It is a subtle recognition of the countless journeys that moved through London's streets, often unseen, unrecorded in the louder chronicles of the past. Their silent journeys remind us of the softer, more challenging currents that flowed just beneath the surface of grand historical narratives. These were not the stories of emperors or grand battles, but the persistent, everyday passages of countless individuals, each contributing a small, steady ripple to the vast ocean of time. Their very silence speaks volumes, a testament to endurance in the face of life's quiet demands. These currents, though gentle in their historical presence, were often challenging in their lived reality. These lives, though hard, were an enduring part of London's intricate tapestry, each thread contributing to the strength and texture of the whole, even if its color seemed muted by the passage of time. They navigated their existence with a quiet determination, leaving behind not monuments, but the very groundwork upon which the city continued to build and breathe. These currents, though gentle in their historical presence, were often challenging in their lived reality. These lives, though hard, were an enduring part of London's intricate tapestry, each thread contributing to the strength and texture of the whole, even if its color seemed muted by the passage of time. They navigated their existence with a quiet determination, leaving behind not monuments, but the very groundwork upon which the city continued to build and breathe. Their struggles and their small triumphs became the invisible mortar, holding the grander structures together, shaping the very soul of the city in ways often overlooked, yet undeniably present. To consider these lives is to feel the subtle weight of history, not as a burden, but as a comforting blanket of shared human experience. It is to acknowledge that the strength of any great city, any enduring human endeavor, lies not only in its most celebrated figures, but also, profoundly, in the quiet perseverance of its everyday inhabitants. Their collective breath, their footsteps, their unseen labors, all interwove to form a living, breathing testament to resilience. This understanding settles like a fine dust over the mind, gentle and profound, hinting at the vastness of stories yet untold. And so, as the echoes of these quiet journeys begin to soften, and the grand tapestry of London's past recedes into a peaceful distance, we too can feel the gentle invitation to stillness. The city, in all its long memory, now whispers of rest, of a calming quiet that follows reflection. It encourages the letting go of thoughts, allowing the mind to drift away from the details into a space of soft tranquility. All the sounds, all the images, all the lingering thoughts can now begin their slow, gentle descent. And so, as the echoes of these quiet journeys begin to soften, and the grand tapestry of London's past recedes into a peaceful distance, we too can feel the gentle invitation to stillness. The city, in all its long memory, now whispers of rest, of a calming quiet that follows reflection. It encourages the letting go of thoughts, allowing the mind to drift away from the details into a space of soft tranquility. All the sounds, all the images, all the lingering thoughts can now begin their slow, gentle descent. Let these gentle images of a forgotten past softly fade, much like the last rays of twilight disappearing beyond the horizon, leaving only the quiet promise of night. The meticulous movements of the clockmaker, the steady, patient hand of the baker preparing for the dawn, the distant murmur of the old River Thames as it continues its ancient, unhurried flow through the heart of the sleeping city, these all melt into a single, seamless quietude. There is no need to hold on, no need to grasp at any particular detail. The grand architecture and the humble alleyways, the bustling markets and the hushed libraries, all these scenes, once so vivid in the mind's eye, now softly blur, like a watercolor painting dissolving into a wash of calming hues. They have served their purpose, offering a glimpse into a time long gone, and now they gracefully recede, taking with them any last stir of activity or thought. There is only a smooth, even surface of calm that remains. London, in its vastness and its endless stories, has now settled into its profound slumber, a deep and undisturbed sleep that stretches across centuries. The cobbled streets are empty, the grand houses dark, and even the air itself seems to hold a hushed reverence for the stillness of the night. It is a city that breathes slowly, gently, peacefully, oblivious to the passage of fleeting moments, resting in its ancient memory. And just as the venerable city finds its quiet, peaceful rest, so too can you. Feel the last threads of thought unraveling, dissolving into the gathering calm. Allow your awareness to soften, to float, to become light and unburdened. There is only the invitation to let go, to surrender to the peaceful ebb and flow of the present moment, free from the past, unconcerned with the morrow. Close your eyes now, if they are not already closed, and feel the gentle wake of stillness settle upon you. Breathe softly, deeply, and evenly, allowing each exhale to release any remaining tension, any last trace of wakefulness. Drift away into a calm and dreamless sleep, carried on the quiet current of profound peace, a quietude as old and as deep as the sleeping city itself.